The first gun clicks. The sound is sharp, like a bone snapping in the quiet room. Then comes another click, and another, until a dozen barrels are pointed straight at the Mafia boss. He is the man they all use to fear. But tonight, his men look at him like he is already a ghost. He does not move. He does not reach for his own weapon. His hands are busy holding something much more important than a gun. Against his chest, a tiny baby breathes softly. The infant is fast asleep, unaware that he is surrounded by men who kill for a living. Beside the Mafia boss's boots, the dog growls. It is a low, vibrating sound that rattles the floorboards. The dog is ready to die for him. The men who once took oaths of loyalty now have cold, murderous eyes. They feel betrayed by their leader's secrets. The man standing across from him is K-19, the leader of this rebellion. K-19 was once the boss's most trusted advisor, a man known for his cold logic and sharp suits. He sneers, his finger twitching on the trigger. "You hid this from us," K-19 says, his voice dripping with fake hurt. "You went soft. You kept secrets from a family. Now you're going to pay for it." The Mafia boss looks him in the eye and says nothing. He doesn't fight back. Instead, he slowly begins to kneel. 12 hours earlier, the world was different. The Mafia boss stood in his office, untouchable. Power flowed through the room every time he walked in. People bowed. People whisper his name with respect. He thought he knew every threat and every lie being told in the city. But power has a way of making a man blind. It makes a leader ignore the small things that actually matter. That morning, K-19 came to see him. K-19 had been with the family for years, rising through the ranks by being more efficient than anyone else. He smiled a bit too politely that day. He asked questions about the schedule that he had no business asking. K-19 kept glancing at the heavy oak door of the private quarters, watching it too closely, as if he knew something was breathing on the other side. A chill ran down the Mafia boss's spine, a warning from his gut that something was wrong. But he was arrogant. He told himself he was too strong to be toppled by a few suspicious looks from K-19. He had the money, the soldiers, and the reputation. He missed the one warning sign that changed everything. The way his own guards didn't look him in the eye when I walked past. That one mistake cost him his empire before the sun even went down, leading to the midnight confrontation. The baby arrived at the doorstep, wrapped in total silence. There was no announcement, no phone call, and no witnesses to see who dropped him off. The Mafia boss didn't tell K-19 or any of his other advisors. He didn't tell his lieutenants. He simply took the child inside and locked the door. He knew that the moment the world found out he was protecting something small and fragile, he would become a prime target. He only gave one order to his household staff. This stays hidden. If a single word leaves this house, you won't live to see the morning. The dog, a massive beast trained for war, became the child's shadow. He never left the baby's side. He didn't sleep, and he certainly didn't trust anyone else, especially K-19, who always seemed to be lurking near the nursery. The animal could smell the danger coming long before any human could. Why would the most feared man alive hide a baby? K-19 told the men the boss was hiding a weakness. They thought he was becoming a father in his old age and losing his edge. They didn't understand that this baby was the most dangerous thing in the city. If the wrong people found out the child was alive, the streets would turn into a war zone. The Mafia boss had to be a shield. K-19 didn't start his coup with bullets. He was smarter than that. He started with whispers. He went to the gambling dens and the warehouses, spreading lies like a virus. The Mafia boss has gone soft, K-19 told the soldiers. He's hiding something in his house. He cares more about a brat than he does about our profits. He is no longer fit to lead this family. Slowly, the men who used to bow when the Mafia boss entered the room began to hesitate. He saw the doubt in their eyes during the weekly meetings. He noticed how they took longer to follow his orders. They were testing him, waiting to see if he would roar or if he would crumble. The air in the city felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. But the Mafia boss didn't stop the rumors. The Mafia boss let K-19 talk. He let the antagonist think he was winning the hearts of the men. Power isn't always about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes, power is about waiting for enemies to show their hands. He watched the loyalty of his family crack, piece by piece. The question everyone was asking was simple. Was the leader losing control, or was he allowing K-19 to think he was? The trap was set when a major shipment of diamonds vanished into thin air. It was a multi-million-dollar deal that the family had been planning for months. Usually, the Mafia boss handled security himself, but this time, the cargo was hijacked before it even reached the docks. To make matters worse, 3 of the best men were found dead near the empty crates. All the evidence pointed straight at the Mafia boss. The security codes used to open the containers were his. The GPS coordinates of the drop-off were stored only in his private safe. K-19 didn't have to accuse him directly. He just stood in the middle of the warehouse and pointed at the bodies. K-19 let the men look at the blood and the empty boxes and decide for themselves who was a traitor. That was the true cruelty of K-19's plan. He turned the Mafia boss's history of secrecy against him. Because the boss wouldn't explain why he was spending so much time at home, the men assumed he was busy stealing from them. When loyalty finally cracks, people tend to believe the worst possible thing. They didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a thief who had betrayed his own blood for money. Throughout all this tension, the dog was the Mafia boss's only true ally. It wasn't just a pet. It was a highly trained animal that could detect a lie by the scent of a man's sweat. It was a living lie detector. Every time K-19 entered the office to give a report, the dog's hair would stand up on its back. It would growl a deep, guttural sound that never stopped until K-19 left the room. The Mafia boss noticed the dog's reaction every single time. He watched how K-19's hands would shake slightly when the dog bared its teeth. He knew the dog was right. Dogs don't care about politics or money. They only care about the truth of a person's heart. He said nothing to his men, and he didn't punish K-19 yet. He just watched and waited for the right time to strike back. The men thought the dog was just a mean animal, but it was actually the smartest being in the room. It knew K-19 was planning a murder. It knew the air was filled with the scent of betrayal. The dog was an early warning system. But even a dog can't stop a dozen men with guns if they decide to turn on their king at once. The dog waited patiently for his master's signal. Finally, K-19 called for a meeting. He said it was for midnight at one of their private clubs. Just to clear the air, K-19 told everyone. He claimed he wanted to give the Mafia boss a chance to explain where the money went and why he was acting so strange. The boss knew it was a setup, but he also knew he couldn't run. If he ran, he would lose his honor and his empire. The Mafia boss did something that shocked everyone when he arrived at the club. He didn't bring his bodyguards. Instead, he walked to the front doors carrying the baby in a sling against his chest. The dog walked closely by his side, its eyes scanning every corner of the dark room. The men looked at him like he had lost his mind. To them, this was a sign of ultimate weakness. They thought he was giving them leverage. They thought he was so desperate that he was using a child as a human shield. They didn't realize that the baby was the reason they were all there. Midnight was chosen for this meeting because the streets were empty and the world was dark. As the clock struck 12, it became clear that K-19's trap was even tighter than imagined. The heavy steel doors of the club clicked shut and the locks turned. The lights were dimmed, leaving most of the room in deep shadows. The Mafia boss stood in the center of the floor, the only one standing while his men sat in a circle around him. K-19 stepped forward into the light. He didn't look like a subordinate anymore. He looked like a judge ready to pass a sentence. "Explain the baby," K-19 demanded. His voice echoed off the cold walls. "Tell these men why you are hiding a child while our brothers are dying in the streets. Tell them why you care more about this brat than the family business." The Mafia boss stayed completely silent. He didn't give a single word of offense to K-19. He just stood there, feeling the baby's heartbeat against his own. The silence angered the men more than any lie could have. They wanted him to beg K-19 for mercy. They wanted him to make excuses, so they could call him a liar. By staying silent, he was taking away their power to argue. But silence is a dangerous game when surrounded by angry men with loaded weapons. They didn't see his silence as a calculation. They saw it as guilt. Then the guns came up. It happened all at once. Men the Mafia boss had fed for a decade, men whose children's school tuition he had paid, and men he had saved from prison. They all raised their weapons. The betrayal was complete. K-19 screamed, his face red with rage. You sold us out. You took the shipment, and you're planning to run away with this kid. The Mafia boss looked at their hands. Many of them were shaking. They weren't cold-blooded killers tonight. They were terrified men who thought their leader had abandoned them. Fear is a powerful motivator. It can make a loyal soldier turn into a murderer in a heartbeat. He could see the sweat on their foreheads and the panic in their eyes. They were waiting for K-19's command to fire. He looked at K-19 and saw a smug smile. The traitor thought he had won. He thought he had successfully replaced their loyalty with fear of the unknown. The Mafia boss wondered what would happen when that fear met his patience. He knew something they didn't know, and the clock on the wall was ticking toward the moment of the big reversal. The tension was at a breaking point. Suddenly, the dog moved. He didn't bark. He just launched himself like a rocket across the room. He didn't go for the guards or the men with the biggest guns. He went straight for K-19. The man screamed and fell backward, dropping his pistol as the dog's jaws snapped inches from his throat. The room froze in shock. Nobody wanted to shoot for fear of hitting K-19 or the animal. In the sudden quiet, the Mafia boss finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. You should have trusted your instincts, he said, looking at the men who still had their guns pointed at his chest. He wasn't talking to the dog. He was talking to his soldiers. He was telling them that deep down, they knew K-19 was a villain. K-19 was pinned to the floor, gasping for breath, while the dog stood over him, growling a warning that meant certain death. The balance of power in the room shifted in an instant. The men looked confused. They looked from K-19 on the floor to the Mafia boss, standing tall with a baby in his arms. They realized he had known about K-19's plan from the very start. Before anyone could move, a voice began to echo through the club's speakers. It was loud and clear. It was K-19's voice, but it wasn't from tonight. It was a recording of a phone call he had made 3 days ago. In the recording, K-19 was talking to their biggest rivals. He was laughing about how he had stolen the diamond shipment and killed his own brothers to frame the boss. The recording played back every lie, every deal, and every piece of information K-19 had sold to the enemy. He had planned to kill the Mafia boss tonight, and then lead the family into an ambush where they would all be wiped out. One by one, the men began to lower their guns. The look of horror and shock on their faces was worth more than all the stolen diamonds. K-19 tried to yell that it was a fake, but his own voice betrayed him. Every word was a nail in his coffin. However, the Mafia boss knew that exposure doesn't always end the violence. The men were still armed, and they were still incredibly angry. They had almost killed their boss because of K-19's lies, and that kind of shame can quickly turn back into raw aggression. Now, the Mafia boss said as the recording faded out, let me tell you why this baby exists. He adjusted the sling so they could see the child's face. This baby isn't mine. He is the last survivor of the family that K-19 wiped out last month to cover his tracks. K-19 thought he killed everyone, but he missed one. This baby is the only witness to his mass murder. The boss had hidden the baby not out of weakness, but to protect the only piece of evidence that would keep their family from being destroyed by a blood feud. If the other Mafia families found out K-19 had killed an innocent family, they would have burned the entire organization to the ground. He had been a shield for the truth, even if it meant being hated by his own. Protecting the truth makes enemies desperate. K-19 knew that if the baby lived, he was a dead man. That was why he had pushed the coup so quickly. He needed the Mafia boss dead before the child's identity could be revealed. The men looked at the baby, then at K-19 on the floor, and the boss saw the moment their loyalty returned to the rightful leader. K-19 realized he was cornered. With a desperate yell, he kicked the dog away and reached for a backup gun hidden in his ankle holster. He didn't care about the family anymore. He just wanted to take the Mafia boss down with him. He pointed the small pistol at the boss's chest, right where the baby was sleeping. The Mafia boss didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Midnight was never for you, the boss said firmly. He wasn't looking at K-19. He was looking at the door. At that exact moment, the lights in the club flashed green. It was a signal. K-19 thought he had locked the doors to keep the boss in, but the Mafia boss had let him lock them so K-19 couldn't get out. He was in total control of the environment. Elite guards, who had been pretending to go along with K-19's coup, stepped out from the shadows behind the bar and the stage. They had their sights on every rebel in the room. K-19 froze, his finger on the trigger, realizing that he had walked into a cage of his own making. He was no longer the hunter. K-19 was the prey, surrounded by his boss's true loyalists. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The men who had raised their guns against the Mafia boss earlier now turned them toward K-19. The shame in the room was thick. They realized they had been played like puppets by K-19, a man who didn't care if they lived or died. The dog stood firmly between the baby and K-19, ready for the final command. Balance was restored to the Empire, but it wasn't a happy ending. In their world, justice is never clean, and it is never quiet. The men looked at the Mafia boss, waiting for his order. They expected him to demand blood. They expected him to execute K-19 right there in the club. But the boss had a different kind of punishment in mind for a man who betrays family. The Mafia boss looked at K-19, who was now shaking with real terror. The man knew what happened to people who broke the code of silence. The boss didn't have to say a word to his men. They knew what to do. They grabbed K-19 by the arms and dragged him toward the back rooms. The dog watched them go, finally relaxing by his master's feet as the traitor disappeared. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, the Mafia boss walked out of the club. The air was cold, but the city was quiet. The baby was still asleep, his small hand gripping the boss's shirt. The dog followed closely, his tail wagging slightly for the first time in days. Behind them, the club was silent again, but it was a silence reshaped by absolute loyalty. The Mafia boss had proven that being a leader isn't just about having the biggest gun. It is about foresight and knowing when to let enemies think they are winning. His men would never doubt him again, but the price had been high. He had almost lost his life to protect a child and a secret that K-19 almost used to break the family apart. Power wasn't about fear anymore. It was about control and choosing the exact right moment to strike. As the Mafia boss put the baby into the back of his car, he knew this wasn't the end. K-19 was gone, but there would always be others. This was just the beginning of a colder, smarter reign. He would protect what was his, no matter the cost. The drive back to the estate was filled with a heavy silence. The Mafia boss looked out the window at the city he ruled. The streets were waking up, and people were starting their daily lives, completely unaware of the war that had just ended. He looked down at the baby. It was strange that something so small had the power to destroy an entire empire built by K-19's lies. When they arrived home, the head of security met them at the gate. He didn't say anything. He just nodded with deep respect. He had stayed loyal when everyone else wavered. The Mafia boss carried the baby inside, and the dog immediately went to his favorite spot by the fireplace. The house felt different now. The tension was gone, replaced by a sense of victory over K-19. The boss sat in his office and stared at the empty chair across from him. He thought about K-19. They had been friends once. That is the problem with a Mafia life. The people closest to you are the only ones who can truly hurt you. He made a vow to never let anyone get that close again, except for the dog and the innocent child he had saved. The next few days were spent cleaning up the organization. The Mafia boss had to talk to the other families and show them the evidence of K-19's crimes. He showed them the recording, and he showed them the baby. He told them that the child would be raised under his protection. They agreed to stay back, mostly because they were afraid of his tactical brilliance in trapping K-19. He promoted the guards who had stayed loyal and gave a stern warning to the ones who had doubted him. He didn't kill them. He needed them to live with their shame. Every time they looked at him, he wanted them to remember the night they pointed a gun at the man who provided for them. That shame would keep them more loyal than any fear K-19 tried to instill. The dog became a legend among the men. They started calling him the Ghost because he moved so quietly and saw everything. They brought him steak and treats, trying to get on his good side, but the dog ignored them all. He only had eyes for the Mafia boss and the baby. He knew who his true family was, and he didn't care for anyone else in the world. As weeks passed, the baby started to grow. He began to crawl around the office while the Mafia boss made deals and managed the city's business. It was a strange sight, a feared boss discussing millions of dollars while a toddler played on the rug. But it sent a message to everyone. He was a man who could protect the vulnerable, which meant he could protect his men. The business started to thrive again. The rivals who had tried to work with K-19 were now paying double in apology money. They knew the Mafia boss had eyes everywhere. They knew he had recordings. They knew that if he could hide a baby and a dog in the middle of K-19's coup, he could hide anything. His reputation was now legendary across the country. He realized that the dangerous reason he had hidden the baby was actually his greatest strength. It gave him a purpose beyond just making money or holding territory. It made him a father figure to his men in a new way. He wasn't just a boss. He was a guardian. And a guardian is much harder to kill than a simple criminal like K-19. One evening, the Mafia boss sat on the balcony with the dog at his feet, watching the sunset. He thought about how close he had come to losing everything to K-19. If the dog hadn't lunged, or if the recording hadn't played at the right second, he would be dead. It was a reminder that even the best plans need a bit of luck and a lot of loyalty. The baby's nanny came to take him to bed, and for a moment, the child reached out his tiny hand toward the boss. The Mafia boss took it, feeling the warmth of the skin against his scarred palms. In that moment, he knew he would do it all over again. He would face 1,000 men like K-19 just to keep this piece of innocence alive. The dog looked up and let out a soft huff, as if he was agreeing with the boss's thoughts. They had been through hell together, and they had come out on the other side. The city was secure, the family was united, and the truth was safe. The Mafia boss stood up and walked inside, ready for whatever the next chapter his reign would bring. The Mafia boss's reign continued for many years after that night. People still tell the story of the man who brought a baby to a gunfight and won. It became a legend that kept the peace better than any army could. K-19 was never seen again, and his name was erased from the family books. The organization moved forward, stronger and wiser than before. The dog lived a long, happy life, guarding the boy until his very last breath. And the boy, he grew up knowing he was protected by the most dangerous man in the world. He didn't grow up to be a criminal. The Mafia boss made sure he had a better life. That was his final act of control, choosing a future that didn't involve the cycle of blood. The Mafia boss is still there, and he still has his secrets. But now, when he walks through a room, the men don't just bow out of fear. They bow because they know he is the man who sees the things they miss. He is the man who hides the truth to save the family. He is the boss, the guardian, and the living legend. Looking back, the midnight meeting was a turning point for the entire organization. It stripped away the masks everyone was wearing. It showed the Mafia boss who was a friend and who was a parasite. In that world, one doesn't get many chances to see the truth so clearly. Usually, the truth only comes out when it's far too late to do anything. He learned that silence is the most powerful weapon a leader has. When a man speaks, he gives away information. When he stays silent, he lets others fill the void with their own mistakes. K-19 talked himself into a grave because he couldn't handle the quiet. The Mafia boss survived because he embraced it. He let the world spin while he stayed still. The baby grew into a young man and eventually asked why he was saved. The Mafia boss told him the truth. He saved him because he wanted to see if he could still save something good. In a life filled with taking, giving someone a chance at life was the most rebellious thing he could do. It was his victory over the darkness K-19 represented. The dog is gone now, buried in a quiet spot on the estate, but his spirit remains. The Mafia boss sometimes thinks he hears that low growl when a stranger enters a room. It keeps him sharp. It keeps him from becoming the arrogant man he was. He never ignores his instincts anymore, and he never ignores the small signs of a coming storm from enemies. The Empire is peaceful now. There are no more whispers of the boss going soft. Everyone knows his kindness is a choice, not a weakness. They know that the man who held a baby during a coup is the same man who could destroy an enemy like K-19 completely. He has found the perfect balance between the lion and the lamb. As the Mafia boss looks at the city lights one last time, he has no regrets. The dangerous reason he hid the baby was to save the future, and that future is now secure. He is the master of his domain, the protector of the innocent, and the leader of the pack. His story is one of blood, but it ends with the triumph of loyalty.
Remember, loyalty builds empires. Betrayal destroys them. Choose power wisely. The underworld never forgets. The Boss Chronicle. Like and subscribe.